Okay. Good afternoon, everybody who's joined in today. I think people are still coming in, but we'll get cracking anyway. Just to kind of give you a bit of background here. So I think we're expecting about 420 or more people to join in from over 200 companies. So thank you very much for those joining us. It's very much appreciated. Just so you're aware, we can't see you, we can't hear you. It's just myself and Laurie who are presenting today. You'll be able to see and hear. So don't worry about your cameras and things. If you would like to introduce yourselves, there should be a chat bar on the side that you can use to say hello, introduce yourselves. And there's also a Q&A feature. There's a tab there. So if you want to ask any questions, we will be doing questions at the end of the presentation, or we'll be doing answers, more to the point. And you can upvote any questions that you see that you like as well. So please feel free to use that feature. We're scheduled to take an hour, probably should take about 45 minutes. So we do have time for questions as well at the end. This is being recorded. So if you would like a copy, please feel free to reach out to Jo after the session. She'll provide you with it. You've probably already got her details. If you don't, you'll see them at the end of the deck. And also she'll probably be in contact with you anyway afterwards, just to make sure you enjoyed it. So we'll get cracking then. Like I said, it's myself, Stephen York, and Laurie Garrison. We're your presenters today. So I'm going to hand over to Laurie first to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laurie. I'm a UX consultant at Bunnyfoot. During my time here, I've worked with charities, e-commerce, and financial services products. Prior to working for Bunnyfoot, I worked for a big US-based software company that happened to have a big office here in Yorkshire. And prior to that, I was doing a master's degree in human-computer interaction. And prior to that, I was a university lecturer and researcher in the humanities. So I'm quite a career changer.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. So I'm Stephen. So I'm a head of UX consultancy here at Bunnyfoot. I've been around for about 2.5 years, but I've spent the last 25 years in digital development, mostly in financial services, Santander, Citibank, and Egg Financial Services, for anybody who remembers that. Managing UX and design teams, product teams, and development teams. I also run a couple of other training courses, the fundamentals of UX and HCD, and designing for usability and human perceptions. But we'll show you some of our other courses that we do at the end of the presentation. So for those of you who don't know, Bunnyfoot has been around for 24 years. We focus largely in research and design. We're a team of about 40 people. With expertises across strategy, research, experience design, service design, usability. We are based in London and Sheffield, but thanks to our international partners, we do have a global reach. We provide a number of different services. So training is one of the things we do, but we also offer a range of UX and research solutions. And we fundamentally and truly believe in delivering excellent designs through evidence. So everything we do, we very much preach evidence. We are also part of a large group called the Sideshow Group. So we have a number of sister companies who provide other digital services. So SEO, page search, paid social, content, branding, etc. So it allows us to provide a full service. Should anybody want anything beyond our expertise, we can reach out to our sister companies. So agenda for today, we're going to be talking about, well, first of all, what is quantitative research, the benefits and the risks of it, and then I'm going to hand over to Laurie, who will talk through the types of research. So what is quantitative research? So in its most simplistic form, it's essentially any research that deals with numbers. So you can quantify your findings with a number, a percentage, a ratio, or anything like that. It uses statistical mathematical tools to derive results. For example, the mean, the median, the average numbers, or range, standard deviation, coefficient, anything like that. Any of those tools are used in evaluating the research. It enables us to reveal patterns. So for example, you can understand whether your satisfaction is getting better or worse, or your abandon rates are improving. It enables researchers to quantify attitudes and opinions, so we can understand what proportion of our users think the way they do. It enables us to make generalizations about larger population, because the answers are robust that we get out of quantitative research. So if you were to do a usability test and 3 out of your 5 participants fail a task, you can't then go and say that the 6% of your population would fail because your sample's too small. But in quantitative research, we are allowed to make those generalizations. And typically it would answer questions like how many, how often, and how quick. So the relationship between quantitative and qualitative research is that they complement each other. This example here is very simplistic, but it illustrates the relationship between the two things. So on the left, you've got quantitative research where the researcher observes how many people are showing a particular behavior. In this case, they're counting how many people take a free ice cream. What they discover is that very few people do actually take one. And they probably have to observe a significant number of people to understand that only 1 in 30 take an ice cream. But they've got no idea why they're only 1 in 30 take it. That's where qualitative methods come in, and we have to understand why. So this is where you use qualitative research to understand what the reasons, what are the thoughts, the emotions that are going through people's minds when they're doing it, and you take it on with a smaller sample size than you'd done originally. So you wouldn't have to observe as many people or speak to as many people to understand that. So what are some of the benefits of quantitative research? Well, reliable and accurate data. The results obtained are extremely reliable. Generally numbers do not lie. They offer an honest picture of the research that you've conducted. They help resolve conflict. So you've probably heard the expression data trumps opinion. Well, opinion wars can derail or delay development. Of course, qualitative data does exactly the same thing. That can be relied on. But what you tend to find is that quantitative data is more persuasive, because some management, they need large quantities of data to convince them. And they will often rely on quantitative research over qualitative research to convince them. Quick data collection. So most quantitative research is conducted through surveys or questionnaires. These can be quick to set up by an experienced researcher. And the process of analyzing and presenting the data is also comparably quick, using statistical tools and online solutions that are available. And finally, it can reduce bias. So bias that moderators may bring into an interview, however unintentional it is. However, it doesn't completely remove it. So it hasn't eliminated bias. And this is because you can put bias into your questions when writing them, if they're not phrased correctly, but a skilled researcher could avoid this. Also, you've got participants can bring bias into surveys. For example, recall bias or recency bias. These will affect what people can actually remember, or how they prioritize what they remember. So what are some of the risks of quantitative research? Well, rigidity. Researchers must carefully plan their studies. There's often no opportunity to adapt your test, as you might do with a qualitative study. If participants don't understand your question, you can't adapt it and help explain it. Or if you want to probe a little bit further into what participants mean, that's very difficult with a quantitative research. Unreliable behavioral data. Typically, quantitative research doesn't help you understand how people behave. You can ask them how they behave, but it's very unreliable. They're notoriously not very good at being able to remember what they actually did, and will remember wrong things. Statistical significance. Quant studies often require a finding to have a statistical significance for it to be considered important. However, if it's a rare occurrence, this might not actually show up in a study. So to take an example, there was an election in 2000 in the US, and in Florida they use a ballot paper which was called the butterfly ballot at the time, and thousands of voters incorrectly voted for the wrong candidate because of the design of the ballot paper. However, this represented a really small proportion of the voters. So a sample of 100 people would not have derived a statistically significant result, or even 200. But a qualitative research may have revealed a different behavior. So it may have revealed that people hesitated, they mentioned something in the design they didn't understand. Even though they got the answer right, they may have revealed more with a qualitative research. And finally, survey structure. So how you create a question can have a big impact on how people will answer it. So if you have too many questions, it can lead to a paradox of choice and overwhelm people. If you have too many, if you have too many answers, it can lead to a paradox of choice. If you have too many questions, it can lead to a high abandonment rate. We typically see that anything over 30 questions and your abandon rate will exceed 5%. If you go over 60 questions, then it exceeds 20% abandon rate and rapidly increases from there onwards. Unclear or ambiguous questions can lead to poor responses. Like, for example, if you said, what do you like to eat? Well, what do you like to eat depends on the time of the day, where you are at the time, and all these things will influence it. So you need to make sure your questions are properly worded. And even the order of a survey can, order of the answers can influence the one they choose. So this is the results of the census from 2011 and 2021. So as you can see here, there in 2011, there were 19% of the population that responded identified as British only. But 10 years later, in 2021, that percentage has increased to 55%, so almost 3 times as high. Now, this could have been just due to how people view themselves between 2011 and 2021, but also the UK government has acknowledged the fact that in 2011, British only was the 5th option that you could select, whereas in 2021, it was the first option you could select. So you've got to ask yourself the question, how many people got to the first answer, went, that applies to me, selected it, and didn't go any further, didn't read any of the other options? It may be that they actually genuinely felt that was the right thing for them. But when you've got answers that more than one could apply to the respondent, you've got to be considerate about how you order them and also how you word them. And also, there's a risk in how you present data. So in the 1980s, there was a NASA rocket called Challenger that exploded on takeoff, which some of you may remember. This is the data that was examined by the scientists before the rocket took off. And what it shows is, in chronological order, each of the rockets that had previously taken off, the temperature when they took off, and whether or not there was any damage to the O-ring. So it was the O-ring is the thing that actually caused the explosion of the rocket when it took off. And this data was examined by all the scientists and all the engineers before takeoff, and they didn't identify any problem. Since after the crash, this data has been produced, or this output, and this is exactly the same data in a slightly different format. And what you'll see here is you've got across the bottom the temperature at the time of launch, the damage index up the left-hand side. So you can see there are a number of launches where there was no damage at all above 65 degrees. But once you drop below 65 degrees, there is definitely a pattern whereby it is the likelihood of damage to the O-ring increases significantly. And this pink bar on the left there says the forecasted temperature on January the 28th. That was the date of takeoff. So you can see it was significantly lower. And anybody looking at this data would see that there is a massive potential risk to the O-ring and the rocket. So that's it for benefits and risks. I'm going to pass to Laurie now to talk to you about some of the different methods.
Okay, so we've got limited time today, so I selected 3 methods to talk about. So it'll be surveys, analytics, and unmoderated testing. Okay, so surveys. This is the most widely known quant method. When we say quantitative methods, I think people usually think of surveys. So what are they? It's a series of questions that usually takes about 15 to 20 minutes to complete. We don't usually want it to be any longer, or participant fatigue might set in and your results could become less reliable. However, length in surveys can vary. Some surveys can be 1 or 2 questions. For example, you've all probably seen the in-app surveys that pop up after you complete a task on a website and ask you a single question. Survey questions can be multiple choice, rating scales, ranking items, or open-ended. Surveys can collect quantitative as well as qualitative data, and you normally get your qual data from the open-ended questions with a text box to fill in. And this webinar is about quantitative methods, but really it's impossible to fully separate quant from qual, so I am going to mention qual once in a while. And personally, I really like getting qual data in surveys because the responses are usually short and sweet, and it's already neatly organized into categories based on your questions, so you can analyze it a bit quicker. So what questions can a survey answer? It depends on what you need to know, but here are some examples. So we can tell you, what are the demographics of my users? How often do they use my product or website? What devices are they using? What time of day do they use it? Or what are their other habits relevant to your topic, task, or product? And on this slide, oh, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, on this slide, I've got a couple of examples. So the first one, over the past 12 months, how often have you visited our website? So there's a set time period of 12 months. We don't want to test the participant's memory too much. Each response is a range, which also makes it easier for the participant. There's an option to say not at all. You always have to give a participant an out, so to speak. So if they've never used your product, or if they don't have an answer for whatever reason, you have to allow them to express that. So I've got another example there. How easy or difficult is it to complete your tax return? And so now this is coming from my previous experience working with accounting software. This is a question geared toward documenting attitudes. So we use a rating scale here to get the quant data. And then personally, I would follow up with a please help us to understand why, and a text box to get that little bit of qual data. Yeah, so having worked with accounting software previously, I know there are pretty strong feelings about this work. And it's worth gauging this in order to help you shape the kind of experience that your user is going to have. Okay, so more about surveys, when and how. So when I talk about each method, I'm going to be referring to 3 stages: discovery, so when you're doing your research before launch or some other big change in your product; prototyping, so this is the stage where we're designing and iterating. And some people like to divide that up into further categories, but I'm just going to call it prototyping here. And then there's live, where the product has been running for a while and we're monitoring and maintaining. So when should you run a survey? Discovery is a fantastic time to do it. And you can use the survey to get your first basic knowledge about your users. You can also do them during live. So surveys can help you understand what is and isn't working about your website or product once it's up and running. And so the obvious example is the 1-question survey when the user has completed a journey. So you might say, thank you for purchasing, blah, blah, blah. How would you rate your experience of our website today? Or you can run surveys multiple times or regularly at set intervals to gauge whether your website is still serving users' needs as you intended. So how do you deploy a survey? You'll need to use software like SurveyMonkey or maybe Qualtrics, which is the more academic version. You can use unmoderated testing platforms for surveys as well, like UserZoom and Loop11. You'll need to recruit participants. So you can draw on your current contacts if you're up and running. or you can hire a recruitment agency. And we do have our own recruiters here at Bunnyfoot who would be happy to speak to you about any recruitment needs you've got. You also need to offer an incentive to your participants. So for a survey, it's usually something like a prize draw of like 10 Amazon vouchers or something like that. So one of the questions that people always ask about surveys is, how many participants do I need? And having big numbers often provides people with a sense of security. So we can always do numbers at Bunnyfoot, and our surveys are often run into the hundreds, maybe even more. However, it depends on your project. And with some projects, numbers like 40 or 50 can be enough. The other thing I hear people saying about surveys is, how do I draw insights from the survey data once I have it? And the answer is, there's no magic in this. You just need to write really good questions with purpose, and you need to anticipate what you're going to be able to do with the data right from the beginning. So how you draw the insights depends on how you write the questions. And we're going to cover question writing in great detail in the training course I'm offering on quantitative methods. That'll be on 25th July if anyone's interested. You also, when you're writing a survey, you also need to know the platform really well. So you need to know how you can divide up and filter the data if you're going to do lots of cross-checking. So I've got an example for you here in the slide. So this is from an actual project. So I redacted it. And we've used my favorite how easy or difficult question here. And when we did this, we set this up so that we could filter on the basis of several characteristics of vulnerability in order to see if those characteristics seem to be having an impact on the experience. So that's to say, we were trying to figure out, did the lower scores in this chart tend to come from participants with the vulnerabilities? And in this case, we got some interesting results, and it actually pointed us toward doing some more moderated testing to understand exactly how those users were being impacted. So if I can make this work, the next thing we're going to do is a poll. Okay, so these are survey questions themselves. Okay, I think I've started that. And so our first question, does your organization have analytics installed right now? So I've given you 3 answers, yes, no, and I don't know. The I don't know is there to give you your out. If I wanted to play it really safe, I would also give you a not applicable, but because we're in a webinar about quantitative user research methods, I'm going to assume that everybody's working with a website, app, or piece of software. And we've got another question coming through, hopefully. Okay, so how often do you or someone else in your organization review your analytics data? So this question is a little bit wordy, but I would argue that it needs to be written this way because we need to make sure that the participant understands that this is about practice in their organization, not just them personally. Okay, so the answer's coming through at least. And we've got one more for you. Okay, so how useful do you find analytics data? So this question is a little bit controversial. I think some people might say that it's a bit leading to tell the participant to say that the participant needs to say it's useful. It would be worse to say something like, how positive is your experience of analytics data? That's very leading. But the copywriter in me just won't let me say something like, how positive or negative is your experience of analytics data? So we're going with this version. Also, this question, I think this would be perfect for a rating scale and then a follow-up with please help us to understand why. but our webinar software doesn't allow us to do that. So we're going to have to go with a short answer fill-in question. Okay, and so that brings us to analytics. So analytics can be the best starting point for understanding what's happening on a website. So what is it? It collects data about your website traffic and how your users interact with your site over a period of time. It would normally require at least a 3-month minimum to collect the data, but longer is usually better. So what questions can analytics answer? How many people have been on my site? How long were they on the site? Which pages have they viewed and which order did they look at them? How long did they look at each page? Did they take any actions on the site? And actions would be clicks or signups or reaching a final page in a set journey. Did they buy something? The other thing you can do with analytics is investigate if there are any drop-off points. And then when you identify them, it's useful to do some testing to explore what's going on there. Okay, so when should you use analytics? I would argue all the time, really. Any live website ought to be running analytics. If there's any obvious change to user behavior, you'll be able to identify it and investigate it. How do you deploy analytics? Google Analytics and Hotjar are the most commonly used programs. A technical setup is needed to get them up and running on your site. And also technical knowledge is required to set up funnels and paths. These are the Google Analytics terms. And this is about how we establish the user journey we want to monitor and how we track the most common patterns of using the site. So we set up journeys that we want them to take, but we also have a look at what they're just naturally doing when they land on the site. I've given you another redacted example here. So you can normally see the page title in these diagrams, but I've covered up so you can't see who this is or what kind of business it even is. So this is a website where there's a really big drop off as soon as the visitors arrive. So in the first column on the left there, this is the first action. They arrive on the page and analytics is telling you where they're coming from. The second column they land on, it tells you which page they've landed on. And then you can see in the second column, there's a great big red waterfall-like diagram, which shows that all of the users are landing on the first page and then basically just dropping off. So we know it's a really blunt conclusion, but we know that something is very wrong with the content on this site. So one of the things we could do would be unmoderated testing. That could work really well because there are very obvious things wrong. We'll be able to quickly figure out why users are just giving up. And now we'll move on to unmoderated testing. So what is unmoderated testing? This is testing without a moderator present. It's always remote. Examples are A/B tests, click tests, and other scenario-based tasks. We usually use survey questions in these tests as well. So any unmoderated testing platform will normally allow you to use survey questions too. What kind of questions can unmoderated testing answer? So we can ask, which version of a page do users find easier to navigate? So this would be A/B testing. Do users know where to click when they want to buy something or log in or sign up for something? And we could use a click test for this. Are users able to easily understand and navigate through a user journey on your website? That would be a scenario-based task. Also, is there a particular category of users who's struggling with the task? And you can use survey questions to establish this. So you'll see that I've put a great big flashing question mark in the title. One of the most common things I hear people saying about unmoderated testing is that it's quicker and cheaper. And sometimes this is absolutely true. But this depends on a couple of things. So first, your recruitment. If you're recruiting for something niche, the participants can be hard to find. So in my previous job, we had to recruit actual accountants sometimes. However, if you're doing something like thinking of previous projects like fast food or current accounts, these are things they're very widely used, so it's easy to find people for those kinds of studies. It also depends on your internal requirements. So these platforms, you can create template reports, and these platforms allow you to process the data in certain ways. If you're happy with the set ways that are offered, then you can do things very quickly and it can be very cost effective. If you start changing things and making it more and more bespoke, it becomes more time consuming. Also, with the testing being unmoderated, you really need to get the copywriting of the questions right. So if your questions are not simple and clear and easily carried out by the participant, your results can be unreliable. In the example here, I've created a fake heat map so you can see a result, what a result can look like for a click test. So let's say the task was, show us how you would learn more about the company. And in my fake heat map, there's a great big red hotspot on the main nav. So there are items in the main nav for our services and about us. So we can conclude that's working pretty well. But I've also got a fake great big hotspot on the why choose us section. So we might think maybe this is that the users think this is a button, or they expect this to be able to be something that they should be able to click on, and it's not. So we would look at doing some minor design changes, and then we might run the same exact test again. So quick repeats like this are what makes unmoderated testing really efficient. And I think click tests are fantastic for getting quick fire design recommendations as well. Okay, so the when and how of unmoderated testing. When? So this would be, prototyping would be a really good time to use this. Early versions of your product can be tested as screenshots or semi-functioning websites, prototypes using software like InVision. Live is also a possibility. Unmoderated testing is fantastic for getting to minor improvements that you can make to design or copy, or for investigating problems that arise. So how do you deploy unmoderated testing? You'll need to select a platform. The three that we've used before at Bunnyfoot are UserZoom, that's my personal favorite, User Testing, and Loop 11. You need to recruit participants. So some of these platforms come with a participant panel, and some require you to recruit your own participants. You need to build each test. This can be technical and time consuming, but most platforms allow you to save templates and select from lists of previously used questions. And you need to analyze and report the results. So you usually need experience of analyzing survey and usability test results to get the most out of unmoderated testing. And we'll be covering most of these things in more detail in the course I'm running on 25th of July as well. Okay, so now I've got some example projects. Okay, so the first client, this is not a real client, and the image I've got there is from a template from Figma. It's also not a real brief, but I'm trying to make it as realistic as possible. So we're going to say we've got a client that is a high street bank here, and they're implementing a new in-app credit limit increase journey. So we'll say that they know internally that the uptake for this function is not what they think it should be. And they already have an idea that there need to be some design changes to improve it. They also need to check understanding of risk with vulnerable groups under the new FCA consumer duty. So their questions are, how can we quickly optimize the journey for the in-app credit limit increase? So we could do A/B testing or click testing on a platform like UserZoom if we were pretty sure the changes would be relatively minor. And this would revolve around a main simple task that could be, show us how you would increase your credit limit. The other question is, how can we ensure the new journey lives up to the new FCA consumer duty? So anyone working in the financial industry will be aware that there's a big overhaul of a lot of products coming from some new requirements from the FCA. And this involves testing with consumers with a particular focus on risk and vulnerable customers. We've done this sort of work already this year. And for this brief, if we're doing unmoderated testing, we can set this up so that we have some survey questions that will test participants' understanding of the risk involved in increasing a credit limit. We can also use survey questions to track any of the vulnerabilities the FCA is interested in and to understand those vulnerabilities, if those vulnerabilities are impacting the use of this function. So that one was a really specific, well thought out brief. The next one is a lot broader. And again, this is not a real brief. I've just chosen a website that I like to use as a placeholder here. And this is not entirely true of this website. So this is in our fake brief. This is an e-commerce website that sells cooking equipment and ingredients, but it's really content heavy, and that's what draws the users there to hopefully make a purchase. So the questions the client has: how are users engaging with the current content, and can the current content be improved? So the first thing I'd want to do with this website would be to have a look at the analytics. So hopefully the client has funnels set up and we can figure out if there are any obvious drop-off points. We can also have a look at how the content is doing. Are there any problematic bounce rates or very short time on page we could deal with? We could also get a really good sense of the basics with a survey. So we'd be asking participants questions like, what device are you using when you're searching for content? How are you saving and returning to content? What time of day are you doing your cooking? What are the circumstances of your cooking? Do you cook alone or with others? Is it for fun or is it an occasion? So we'd be looking to establish trends about how users are behaving when they're using the site, so we can make recommendations about things like maybe using a saving or a favoriting function, when to recommend items that are sold on the site, when to highlight certain types of content. So maybe people need recipes for occasions, for cooking with children. And then the other question with this client is, can the user experience of the sales journey be improved? So ideally, we'd have some idea from analytics where the drop-off points are, but that's not a necessity. This site is up and running and doing well, so we're looking to improve rather than go for a major redesign. We would be looking at using iterative task-based testing, or we'd be looking at doing A/B testing. Maybe there is simply a lack of clarity or some improvement to the placement of a button or a call to action that needs to be improved. Okay, so that's it for me. From me, and what I want to tell you about next is UX, Bunnyfoot's UX training program. So if you're interested in doing some training with us, I'm going to be running a quant course on the 25th of July. It sits within our research section of our training program. We also cover the fundamentals of UX. We cover user requirements, and we have 3 design courses as well. In addition, we're also certified providers of the internationally recognized CPUX courses. And now, if you want to talk about any briefs further, either broad and woolly or specific and focused, please do get in touch with Joe Hutton, our account manager. And if you want to have a copy of the recording, or if you have any questions that we don't manage to cover in the Q&A, please get in touch with Joe. Okay, so we'll leave Joe up there. Okay, do we have...
So we've
what
got
questions have we got here?
We've got 4 or 5 at the moment.
Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. Interesting about the risk. Is it fair to say quantitative on its own is open to misinterpretation, so we'll always need expert analysis to frame the findings?
So I can take that if you want, Laurie. So I think
Okay.
so. I would say no. It's not always open to misinterpretive quantitative analysis and data. You could get a survey and ask how many bedrooms are in your house and how many children do you have, and it's fair to say that you could trust that the responses that come back from that are going to be fairly robust. Conversely, if you were to ask people in a survey how many units of alcohol did you drink last week, that would have some risk associated with it. Respondents might be on holiday, they might be doing dry January. All these sort of things can influence it. So that could be open to misinterpretation. As to whether or not you required qualitative research on top of your quant, it would depend whether or not you got any responses that required clarification. So something that you didn't quite understand. So, you might be able to discover how many bedrooms on average people have in the house, but you won't understand why. You won't understand whether or not that's because they need those bedrooms for family, for extra space, for they work from home, whatever the reasons are for having the number of bedrooms. You won't understand that. Surveys will do have the option for free text answers. They don't allow you to probe, so you may not get the full answer, and they take a little bit longer to analyze. You can only have a certain number of free text answers in a survey, really. But I hope that answers that one.
We also have a question about incentives there. So I mean, I think incentives are really important. If at all possible, I think you need to be offering incentives. But for surveys, it's often a prize draw, which tends to be 5 times £50 vouchers, and then you can avoid needing to pay every participant. But the uptake is just, I mean, if you do things without an incentive, the uptake just isn't as good.
And it depends as well, I suppose, on what your reasons are for not doing incentive. It may be that you can't afford the incentive, or it may be for legal reasons. You're not allowed to offer incentives. In some organizations, they're prevented from doing so. Another way that you might be able to get around that is by doing some guerrilla surveys. You could go out into the public, try and stop people in the street. Trying to do one online without an incentive is always going to be a tough ask to get people to go online and do it. But face to face, you may be able to convince people and guilt them into stopping for a few minutes to answer your questions. But again, you're probably limited on how much you can ask them
then. We've also got one here. Since we ask people to opt into cookies, we are getting significantly less tracked visits. How many visits do we need to justify a decision to change our site? It's really relative. It's really relative. I wouldn't say there's a set number.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it very much depends on how many visitors you get, but also what is the change that you're hoping to make. I mean, the question is how long is a piece of string? Yes, I think you'd have to understand what it is you're trying to do, what the significance of the change is, and how many visitors you get on a daily basis. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to answer that question without knowing a little bit more details about that one.
Yeah, so if the number of visits, so that sounds like an analytics question, and analytics is more, it's about the time period more than the number of visits. But if you just got very, very little data, it would be hard to make a decision that firm without having some more context, like some more testing or something like that. Okay. Here's one. Ekaterina Zukova, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. What kind of questions would you use to track vulnerabilities? So that would be kind of like, I mean, not typical demographics questions, but questions like demographics questions, so that you can then take your results as a whole, filter on those vulnerabilities, maybe one at a time, and see what kind of results. So you can separate out the people who have vulnerabilities from the other participants and see if there was some kind of correlation with having the vulnerability and having some kind of block or something in doing the task. Hopefully that answers the question. This one I don't have an answer for, but we'll throw it out there and see if you've got an answer, Stephen, or maybe we can see if we can get an answer. Okay, so any stats, whether pop-ups or full surveys, like a web page survey or email link, have better response rates?
I don't have any stats. I also think it's comparing a little bit apples and pears. So generally, pop-ups, you tend to rely on people filling them in to help out. So it'll be a service pop-up on an e-commerce or similar website or banking website. Whereas clicking on email links tend to be incentivized, not necessarily all the time in both of those. I couldn't tell you, but also, you're talking about comparing what's the email open rate against what's the click rate on a pop-up. I couldn't tell you what the response rate improvements would be on other comparisons between those two, to be honest. But we tend to always do email surveys when we're sending them out, whereas a pop-up's generally servicing for an e-commerce website or similar.
Okay, we've got one. Emily Holmes, we struggle with space showing a survey on our website on mobile devices due to not having space with live chat and other features in the way. Does anyone else experience this?
Yeah, this sounds like a design.
It's very specific.
Yeah. Yes, that sounds like, I don't know if that's a tool. But yeah, if anybody else has got an answer for that in the chat, please put it on there. That might be one for other people to kind of, yes, if they've seen a similar thing.
Yeah, I think she wants to know what everybody else is experiencing as well. But yeah, without having it in front of me. Rebecca Horsfall, what are your thoughts about asking people to give an email address in a quant survey and ask for consent to follow up for qual research, like an interview? I've done that before, but not at Bunnyfoot. Do we have any thoughts about doing that at Bunnyfoot?
This question disappeared before I read it fully. This is doing follow-up to a quant survey.
Yeah, so she was asking, like, how do we feel about doing a quant survey and then asking for an email address and permission to follow up in order to ask if they want to do qual research, I suppose an interview or something as well.
Yes. Yeah. So that's something we've definitely done. I've done that in the past before. So it's very common at the end to say, if you'd like to participate in further research, that will involve a chat for however long. We will contact you. If you're happy, please give us permission to talk to you, provide your contact details. So yes, that's a great way to follow up on a quantitative survey to understand a little bit more details around why people are feeling the way they are.
Actually, yeah, now that I think about it, if you use a platform like user testing and probably user Zoom as well, you can't actually ask for email addresses on those platforms. I don't know if that's what she was aiming at, but because the participants are giving their data to user Zoom and user testing, not to the person who's doing the testing. So it creates all sorts of GDPR problems. But if it's not one of those managed panels from a moderated or unmoderated testing platform, then yeah, I'm all for it. Okay, so we've got What are the pitfalls of using analytics tools such as Hotjar? I think your main pitfall would be that you need to have some experience in what you're looking at. You don't want to come to conclusions that aren't very reliable. However, it's also the case. I mean, when you use Hotjar and analytics, there tend to be really blunt confusions, and they need other investigation usually anyway. Okay, so what are your thoughts? Here's another one. What are your thoughts on quantifying surveys verbatim in terms of themes, etc.? Any best practices for doing so?
So I think I'd say yes, this is definitely something you're able to do with free text answers in a survey. It does take a long time to do the analysis on this. Effectively, you are looking for common themes in responses to identify groups of thoughts or groups of opinions. It can absolutely be done as long as you don't misinterpret or the text message simply by having a keyword. You're not just counting up how many people mention a certain keyword. It's how the context of that keyword that they're talking about. For example, you may ask people about a certain system, and they may say, "Oh, well, it's the fulfillment process." Da, 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 da. And you need to understand: are they all saying that the fulfillment process is too complex, or are some of them saying that the fulfillment process is the part I use the most? So a keyword search to kind of come up with some statistics out of that isn't the right way of doing it. You have to analyze all of the quotes that you're being provided and look for similar themes, which is fine, because that's what you do in qualitative research anyway. You're looking for themes and what people say. These are just usually shorter statements.
So it's also an option. There is software that has been for a long time. There's software out there that will do that for you. Because if you have a survey with like 1,000 responses or something, that's an awfully long time for one person to do it. And also, it's possible to do with, I have not done it, but it's possible to do it with ChatGPT as well, which is free. Okay, so how do you do eye tracking remotely? Do you use any external platforms?
Certainly not something I think we're aware of or have done ourselves. Certainly, if we can have a look into it and find out, but it's something we would always do in a controlled environment in our labs, eye tracking. Unless you're aware of anything. Have you ever seen anything remote, Laurie? I certainly
No, I hadn't. No, I didn't know it was something you could do remote.
No, it involves specialist gear, so you never know. It may come in the future, but I'm not aware of anything at the moment.
I've got a question about, would you ever recommend combining 2 questions for a free text box? How useful did you find X and Y? Well, there's a simple answer that putting 2 things into one question is a really big no-no. I mean, I think there are some exceptions, but it'd have to be a really good exception. There'd have to be a really good reason for it. And then, okay. So somebody does know of, looks like the eye tracking tool, NeuroSync, has been shared if anybody's interested in looking that up. And also, let's see. In local government, you need to do a data protection impact assessment before you can reach out to users for research. And you need to factor the time in. Okay, thank you. I don't think, are there any more questions here?
One's just popped up. Sasha just asked another question about GPT. How would you use GPT that you just
had? GPT. I haven't done it. I'm afraid I haven't done it. I just know that you can.
Okay. I think we've got through them all.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if that's all the questions, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. It's very much appreciated. We hope you've found it at least a little bit insightful. Please, like we say, if you want a copy of the recording, please reach out to Jo. I'll just put her details back up again in case you want to see them. I'm sure she'll be in contact with you soon anyway. And please reach out to us if you want to talk more about quantitative research or any other research and design methodologies or any of our training courses that we offer. But otherwise, take care and thank you very much. Okay.